and massive landslides crushed many unsuspecting victims while they thought they were in the safety of their homes from the raging waters. The economic damage in North Carolina alone is estimated at $53 billion, with only about 5% of this damage covered by insurance. In the aftermath, FEMA's response was in some ways effective, but there were significant issues that need to be addressed. FEMA's core responsibility is to coordinate federal emergency management efforts and support state and local officials with critical resources. It seemed to me and many local officials in Western North Carolina that it took up to 3 days before there was any real visibility from FEMA. And that's just simply not good enough. Allow me to put this in perspective. The storm was over on September 27th for all practical purposes at about 10 a.m. We had 1 million people without power. We had 25 water systems destroyed. And for it to take 3 days for the visibility of FEMA is just not acceptable. There were folks in their homes not only without power, they couldn't flush toilets, they had no drinking water. We were shut off from the rest of the world. And I can't help but think, had this been an attack on American soil, should it take 3 days to see any real evidence of help from our federal government? I would hope not. The distribution of supplies in the immediate aftermath of Helene left much to be desired. For example, on day 3 after the storm, FEMA announced to me that it had delivered 400 pallets of desperately needed water to Western North Carolina. But when asked where those supplies had been delivered, FEMA couldn't provide one single location. They deferred responsibility to the state, which left local officials in the dark about where resources were going and who could also not answer my simple question. A major concern in my district was FEMA's slow response in getting boots on the ground in some areas. For example, in one county, FEMA didn't arrive until over a week after the storm. And it wasn't until 20 days later that a disaster recovery center was opened. In addition, FEMA's communication with local governments and the public was inconsistent and at times confusing. On one occasion, FEMA sent out a press release stating that a disaster recovery center would close temporarily without informing local officials, only to retract it hours later after confusion, numerous inquiries, and local demands. Other failures include FEMA personnel changes with little or no notice to county governments, no-shows for scheduled appointments, issuing hotel vouchers to displaced families that could only be redeemed 2 hours from those displaced families' work or school, an inefficient inspection process that slows consideration of critical benefits, and the 50% threshold for substantial improvement and substantial damage definitions and their required actions are riddled with inconsistencies and irrational thinking. I could share with you many other breakdowns in the FEMA response, but 5 minutes is just not enough time. My office has also seen a significant number of casework issues related to FEMA's individual assistance process. Constituents have reported receiving confusing correspondence, especially regarding initial denials, which only adds to the stress and confusion for people already dealing with the aftermath of the storm. I don't share these issues to criticize FEMA or its employees on the ground. Many hard-working men and women are doing everything that they can in incredibly difficult circumstances. However, as Congress, it's our job to conduct rigorous oversight and ensure that FEMA is held accountable and improves upon their processes. We must address the flaws in FEMA's response to prevent further delays and confusion in the recovery process. And in conclusion, the people of Western North Carolina are tired. The grief that they're experiencing is compounded by bureaucratic missteps, delays, and poor communication. Thank you again for this opportunity, and I would welcome any questions that you may have.
We thank the gentleman from North Carolina. The chair now recognizes Congresswoman Castor for 5 minutes for her testimony.
Well, thank you, Chair Perry and Ranking Member Titus, Chair Graves, and Ranking Member Larson, and the entire committee for the opportunity to testify before the committee today. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with Congressman Edwards. My heart goes out to your community, Congressman. Many Floridians have a special relationship with Western North Carolina. We always think that this is a place that we can go to escape many of the impacts of the extreme hot summer heat. So I don't think there's anywhere you can go right now to escape a lot of these extreme events. So we've got to do a better job providing for our neighbors, strengthening our infrastructure. But this hurricane season was particularly costly and deadly for my community and the state of Florida. Think of the West Coast, in the Big Bend, down through Billeracus to Luna to Buchanan, over probably Congressman Webster. When Milton came over, it even spawned hurricanes over on the East Coast in Rep. Mass District. So this had really started in August. Hurricane Debbie dumped an extraordinary amount of rainfall, 10 to 14 inches on the state. But the real damage came September 26 with Hurricane Helene. It roared up the Gulf, bringing a record 7 feet, 8 inches of storm surge along the coast. So it has flooded out thousands of homes. It swamped the Coast Guard Air Station. It swamped MacDill Air Force Base, that's the home to Special Operations Command and Central Command. It washed away the navigational channel markers for Port Tampa Bay, so fuel could not be delivered. Whole neighborhoods were ruined and businesses ruined. But then 2 weeks after that, on October 9th, with some of our neighbors still in shelters, Hurricane Milton slammed into the state with wind speeds up to 105 miles per hour and a new record rainfall total of up to 18 inches in some areas that they said was a 1 in 1,000 year flood event. So if you survived the storm surge of Helene, it's likely that you were flooded out weeks later by Milton, and many of the rivers took weeks to crest. There were widespread power outages for some people well over a week. This inhibited the ability of small businesses to bounce back. Many of them, these small business owners, you know, are just, they have a very limited range of what they can take. So when power was out, when fuel could not be distributed, when we have police officers guarding gas stations, folks are really asking, there must be a better way. So here are a few recommendations on the aftermath and what I saw leading up to the catastrophes and the aftermath. The misinformation regarding FEMA was a real distraction. It was unnecessary. A lot of time was spent on combating that false information rather than encouraging people to sign up. Communities need to understand where the damage has occurred, and people need those emergency funds right away. I'm grateful for the federal resources and personnel that were surged into the region, including Administrator Criswell being there a couple of times, pre-positioning of resources, search and rescue, the medical assistance teams, but also the guarantee that debris could be cleaned up. Local communities, you would not believe the heartache and the cost of people having their lives out on the street. We've never seen anything like the scale of this. And to be able to say that FEMA is going to be there, the Congress is going to be there to help you clean up your communities is absolutely vital. The massive damage is going to require extensive rebuilding of homes and infrastructure across the area. And Floridians are resilient, but the impact of these back-to-back monstrous storms is straining our local resources. My neighbors are already spending more on property insurance than any other place in the country. Electric bills are out of sight. They need Congress now to follow through with help in helping them rebuild their lives. What Ranking Member Larson highlighted as the Small Business Administration, there's so many homeowners and businesses that need to tap those low-interest loans. There's nowhere else to turn. You don't want them going on a credit card to with those high interest rates to rebuild their lives. We've got to replenish the SBA fund right away. President Biden's proposal of a $98 billion disaster relief bill is good. It's robust, but the Congress now has to take the wheel and make sure that these dollars are getting to where they need to be. I understand the large-scale water and wastewater rebuilding that has to go on in North Carolina, but it's also all across the state of Florida. They were swamped. They polluted our bays, rivers, the Gulf of Mexico, and we're a tourism economy. We cannot rebound with polluted waterways. We've got to be able now to build back stronger, build back in a more resilient way, one that protects the taxpayer dollar so we don't go through this time and time again. Fifth, during widespread power outages, the traditional grid is destroyed. Like I highlighted, it took weeks in some places to get the power turned back on. We've got to be smarter about our electrical systems in this country and build in a more resilient way with microgrids, solar, battery systems that can safeguard our critical infrastructure. We had hospitals lose power with patients inside. We had community health centers massively damaged. We had shelters where people were trying to stay safe and the power went out for weeks. We've got to do a better job making sure that these places are safe and resilient from these extreme weather events. I'll highlight a few other things in written testimony and answers to the committee, but thank you for inviting me to this important hearing today. The heating climate is costing us a lot, and we need to better adapt for our pocketbooks and for our people. Thank you very much for the chance to be here.
Chair thanks our witnesses. Are there questions?
Don't have any questions. I just want to, first of all, tell you how much I appreciate your efforts on behalf of your constituents. I did have the opportunity to visit Western North Carolina with Congressman Chuck Edwards, and just so sorry for what happened to you and your constituents. I know that you're both working really hard to get them back on their feet. I want to thank you for your service, and again, just know that we're praying for y'all's folks, and really sorry that y'all are having to go through this. But thank you.
Others? All right, seeing none, thank you for being here today, and thank you for your testimony and your comments. This concludes the first panel, and I'll give you a couple minutes to go ahead and exit, and we're going to introduce the second panel. Thank you. All right, Administrator Criswell, thanks for your patience here, and thanks for your service. I'm going to welcome you as the FEMA Administrator to our second panel. As a reminder, your written testimony has also been made part of the record, so the subcommittee asks that you limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes, and with that, you are now recognized for that 5 minutes. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chairman Perry, Ranking Member Titus, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify regarding FEMA's efforts in response to Hurricanes Helene and Milton. We value this committee's legislative support and oversight of our agency, and I really look forward to our conversation today. On September 26th, Hurricane Helene made landfall in Florida as a powerful, fast-moving Category 4 storm with hurricane force winds extending 40 miles and tropical storm force winds extending 310 miles from its center. Helene then entered Georgia as a Category 2 hurricane before becoming a powerful tropical storm that continued to release historic rainfall over already saturated soils as it marched through South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia. There were also impacts in West Virginia and Kentucky. Helene's powerful winds and floodwaters altered landscapes and devastated communities in many places not accustomed to experiencing such storms. The destruction caused by Helene was catastrophic. Less than 2 weeks later, Hurricane Milton rapidly intensified into a Category 5 storm in the Gulf of Mexico. After making landfall in Florida as a Category 3, it moved across the state into the Atlantic, spurring a formation of tornadoes and leaving an overlapping trail of destruction in many communities still reeling from Hurricane Helene and Debbie. Many of these same communities were still recovering from Ian, Adelia, and Debbie from previous years. Our hearts have been heavy with the stories of survivors we have encountered. People who lost their loved ones, their homes, and their businesses. These two catastrophic storms led to the loss of over 200 lives and caused extensive damages to homes and neighborhoods across the impacted states. There was also widespread disruption of critical services across the southeastern United States, including the obstruction of transportation routes, which isolated some homes and communities. FEMA's mission statement is a simple one, spelled out in 7 powerful words: helping people before, during, and after disasters. And in my written testimony, I have provided a detailed account of FEMA's preparation, pre-positioning of assets and personnel, and coordination with other federal agencies in support of our state, local, and tribal partners. I have described in detail how FEMA responded to these 2 storms across 8 states, mobilizing the full weight of the federal government to help impacted areas that were not accustomed to this kind of disaster, prioritizing search and rescue efforts, reopening roads to reconnect hard-to-reach areas, delivering essential food, water, and other supplies to residents, and restoring critical infrastructure. And I have described how FEMA is leading recovery efforts in the impacted states, doing everything we can to cut through red tape and expedite assistance to survivors. This has been a challenging time for our workforce of over 22,000 dedicated, hardworking people, many of whom were also impacted by one of these storms themselves and delayed their personal and family recovery to meet our mission and respond to the disaster. Our workforce persevered through all of the challenges I've just described, and they also persevered through a difficult security environment generated by misinformation about FEMA's work spread through social media. We help all survivors, all people, obtain all of the assistance that they are qualified for under the law, and misinformation was making that work much more difficult. I greatly appreciate the voices from members of Congress from across both sides of the aisle who has attested to the work that FEMA was doing on the ground. So I was very concerned when I learned that a FEMA employee had given direction to her disaster survivor assistance team that were completely at odds with FEMA's mission. A critical function of these teams is to go door to door, meet with survivors, meet them where they are, make them aware of available FEMA resources, and help them register for assistance. This employee wrote to about 11 staffers under her supervision that they should, quote, avoid homes advertising Trump, end quote. My senior leadership team provided me with this visual evidence that the employee had in fact issued this statement, these instructions, and they recommended that this employee be terminated. I concurred and directed the termination, and the employee was fired. I released a statement that day, and I will repeat what I said to all of my employees and the American people. This type of behavior and action will not be tolerated at FEMA, and we will hold people accountable if they violate our standards of conduct. I do not believe that this employee's actions are indicative of any widespread cultural problems at FEMA. FEMA, however, has taken appropriate action to ensure that this matter is fully investigated, and I am committed to ensuring that nothing like this ever happens again. In the meantime, we have sent a different team to the field to contact all of the homes that had been skipped over at this one employee's direction, and that work has been completed. Now, I know that this incident is on the minds of many members of this committee, and I will be happy to answer all of your questions about it. However, I hope that we will also have a chance to discuss the great work of our workforce and responses to both Hurricanes Helene and Milton, as well as the important challenges that lie ahead in the recovery effort across these states. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Administrator, for your testimony. We'll now turn to questions from members. The chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Administrator, last week we sent a letter signed by myself and all the committee's Republican members to you about the recent allegations that you just mentioned. FEMA workers skipped the homes of supporters of the president-elect. And following the allegations, you issued a statement that one FEMA employee departed from FEMA's values and was terminated. However, she alleges that those were the instructions from FEMA when she was deployed. She asserts that FEMA supervisors and leadership were aware. And independently, we've received reports of similar practices in places like North Carolina. Tell me about the investigation. Tell me about the investigation, who's conducting it, and has there been an IG investigation initiated by yourself or anybody in FEMA?
Chairman Perry, there is nothing in our policies, in our procedures, in our training that would direct any employee to bypass anybody's home based on their political party. I cannot speak to what her motivations were, but this came to my attention again on November 7th. I directed my team to get me information. They gave me factual information on November 9th, which is when I directed the termination of this employee. This first came to our Office of Professional Responsibility on October 28th through the team member from TSA who was working under this individual. She immediately raised it to the Office of the Special Counsel, who took the case as a potential violation of the Hatch Act. There were ongoing investigations with that, and the Office of Professional Responsibility is currently working with the IG to determine what the investigative matters will be going forward. The IG has not of yet stated they want to investigate this, but I highly encourage them to take on this case and look and see if this was a widespread issue or if this was just a single incident.
So you're working with them and you've encouraged them, but you haven't requested they do so. Now, according to your employee, Ms. Washington, who was asked, and this is a public report, these orders came, who she stated, so you're telling me these orders came from somebody above? And she said, correct. So what has your investigation gleaned regarding her direct supervisors, the people above her? Have you questioned them, and what have your answers been?
Chairman Perry, we do have an ongoing investigation, and we have questioned other personnel in this chain of command, and we find no information at this point that there was anything beyond her direction to her employees to skip and bypass a home.
So the same employee alleged that the Florida team had already been avoiding Trump voters' homes prior to her work there, and that this was, as she said, the culture. Now, these aren't my words. These are the words from a FEMA employee who's claiming that she's being the scapegoat. She said, "But I'm just simply executing again what was coming down from my supervisors." Do you know, how many supervisors does she have? How many people above her before she gets to you?
She is a crew lead, which is the lowest level of supervision.
So there's a lot of people above her, so to speak, in
There
the
are
chain of
several
command.
people. I'd be happy to forward an organizational chart that would show where she sits within the organization.
And your investigation has spoken to certainly the immediate and maybe 2 or 3 steps above that?
We have an ongoing investigation, Chairman Perry, to determine if there was any additional acts that violated our core values of compassion, fairness, integrity, and respect.
Okay,
And
so
at
I
this
get there's
time,
an
we have
ongoing
found none.
investigation, but this isn't a law enforcement thing where you can't say, well, we have an investigation, so we can't talk about it. You can talk about this. Does the investigation include her immediate supervisors and several steps above that?
The investigation includes those that were deployed in this particular incident, and we have found no evidence that there is anything beyond this one employee's specific direction.
You found no evidence at this point. Let me ask you this. Now, you can understand that from America's perspective, certainly the people that weren't visited when FEMA was in town, that it would be in FEMA's best interest to just investigate this internally, say this is a one-off employee, that this claim of hers that it's a culture is just her trying to kind of make sure that the responsibility, the accountability doesn't fall on her. Why shouldn't this be an independent investigation by at least somebody like the IG?
The actions that this employee took are unacceptable.
I know that, and you know that. We agree
And I
on
would
that.
welcome an investigation by the IG.
But you haven't requested. Will you request one?
I will request one.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady, the ranking member from Nevada, Ms. Titus.
Thank you. I mentioned in my opening statement about how FEMA in the new reality has to deal with misinformation. And then you heard one of our witnesses, the Congress lady from Florida, mention how it had been a problem as they tried to recover from the hurricanes. I wonder if you could talk to us about what kind of policy or official strategy y'all might be developing to deal with misinformation and how it does indeed hurt your attempts to get relief out to people who've been hit by these disasters.
Ranking Member Titus, we have experienced some level and type of misinformation probably throughout FEMA's history. We have a standard practice of standing up a rumor control page where we can put factual evidence out there. Because part of it is we also have a lot of people that are trying to defraud those that have just lost so much and pretending to be a federal agency such as FEMA to register even on their behalf. So we have had a standing practice of, when we identify this information, of standing up some type of mechanism to ensure that the general public can get factual information from a validated government source. In this case, it would be our source. But we continue to see this rise. We saw an increase in the amount of misinformation during the response to the Maui wildfires. But the amount of information and misinformation that we saw during the responses to Hurricanes Helene and Milton was at a scale that I had never seen before. And so this requires us to now include in our planning and preparedness how we are going to be able to reach people. The goal is not necessarily to take down misinformation, but how do we ensure that people are getting actual correct information so they're not afraid to reach out to their federal agency and apply for the assistance that they need, that they deserve, and that they're eligible for under the law.
Do you provide this information in different languages, and do you work with community leaders who can help you to get the information out, just not elected officers, but church leaders or civic leaders?
We work in a number of ways. For example, during Maui, we had one of our Native Hawaiian employees develop a public security safety announcement and delivered that out through her own social media channels to let people within her community know that they could and should apply for assistance. I remember an opportunity during Hurricane Ida in Louisiana, where we found a Vietnamese community, and we developed information in their native language and sent it out through their channels, and it was one of our most watched videos on FEMA, so we could get them actual information about what resources were available for them. We have a strong network through our faith-based leadership team to reach out to local faith leaders to help us get the information out to individuals and communities that may be apprehensive to try to reach out and apply for assistance. This is a team effort. It takes all of us in this holistic approach to be able to ensure anyone that was impacted by any natural disaster has access to the programs that we have and that we remove the barriers for them receiving the critical assistance to start their recovery process.
Thank you for that. You know, GAO consistently reports that y'all are drastically understaffed. We've tried to address that by having people be able to take time off and go back to their jobs to go and fight disasters. I think the most recent figure was 35% below what's needed. And we continue to put increasing demands on the agency. We point out how you fail to be there in a certain amount of time, or not enough people on the ground, or not fast enough. But if you don't have the people and the resources to do this work, what can you expect? So could you talk to us a little bit about how you're addressing those staffing challenges and what we might do to be able to help you?
The number that we report on our daily operations brief, which has been in the news as of late, showing that we had less than 5% of our personnel available, is one very specific part of our workforce, and that's those that are solely responsible to deploy to disasters, our disaster workforce. But we have a layered staff to approach when we have multiple events or catastrophic events like we experienced during Hurricanes Helene and Milton. We reach out to our steady state staff and we deploy them out into the field. We have our surge capacity force, which can bring in members from across the federal government that can go out into the field for 30 days. And we had over 800 members from across the federal government that went out into the communities to support them. This type of layered staffing approach is what we plan for. We plan for multiple events like this, but we appreciate tools like the CREW Act that was passed recently that give us the flexibility to recruit more people into our reservists, our intermittent workforce, which are really the heart of what we do. And that's the workforce that we need to continue to focus on, because we don't need everybody every day. But given the amount of disasters that we are experiencing, this surge availability of our intermittent, our reservist workforce is critical to us being able to do the work.
Thank you. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Representative Graves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator, thank you for being here. I want to make note, Mr. Chairman, we've discussed Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton. We have not discussed Hurricane Francine. Administrator, I want to thank you for coming down to Louisiana for that, but I want to tell you why we're not talking about that today. We're not talking about that today because the citizens of Lafourche and Terrebonne Parish, where that hurricane made landfall, imposed both a sales tax and a property tax on themselves, have invested nearly $1 billion in building hurricane protection. We are in an interim phase of protection. We have built an 11-foot levee. Storm surge for Hurricane Francine was 11 feet. If that levee had not been there, if we had not done what we did, we would be having a very different hearing today. Administrator, I want to ask you a quick question. There are rumors, reports that FEMA is having discussions with the Department of Treasury about using ARP funds, American Rescue Plan funds, to help out with recovery. Is that accurate?
With the National Flood Insurance Program at this moment, we are outpacing our payments, over $800 million in payments from the National Flood Insurance Program.
So y'all are having discussions about using American Rescue Plan funds for recovery?
We are not using American Rescue Plan.
There's no discussions about doing that.
Not for FEMA using American Rescue Plan.
Okay, because there were reports that FEMA was having discussions about
No.
using those. Okay, thank you for clarifying. Now, something else I'd like for you to clarify. There's been a lot of discussion about FEMA's emergency food and shelter program and how it's handled. And I just, number one, that's a FEMA program. Number two, that is funded with taxpayer dollars. And so whenever folks say that, well, no, you got to understand it's a different program, these are all taxpayer dollars. And what you do is you triage or you prioritize what is needed, what's most important, and that's where we need to focus. I mean, do you agree with that?
The Shelter and Services Program is a program that was directed by Congress for FEMA to administer. Yes. at
Right,
the
and so
cost of
these are all
$800 million.
federal taxpayer dollars, and so if we need taxpayer dollars in a higher priority area, it would make sense to take funds from a lower priority area. What I'm really struggling with is, as I understand, is that in North Carolina, for example, where I visited, you could have a flood or disaster victim that can get a check for $750. Yet when I go through and I look at the programs and resources that are available to a citizen of a different country that came illegally into the United States, under the FEMA administered program using nonprofits, you could be eligible for housing, for food, for transportation, for healthcare costs, and others. I was able to come, looking at the very documents that these nonprofits were using, I was able to get to a figure in excess of $10,000 for an individual, let me make note again, that is a citizen of a foreign country. How would I explain to a taxpayer that a taxpayer, a citizen of the United States, is eligible for $750, yet a citizen of a foreign country under your agency is still eligible for assistance of $10,000? How would I explain that to somebody?
Congressman, the resources that are available to people impacted by disasters are a variety of resources, and that $750 payment is just to cover those immediate needs. They are eligible for $42,500 in fiscal year '24 for housing assistance and $42,500 for other needs assistance. Those are the programs that are available to people that were impacted by disasters.
So it's very clear that today, and I just visited North Carolina just a few weeks ago, it's very clear to me that there are folks that are in need right now. The disparity that exists in that a citizen of a foreign country that broke the law and came here illegally is they can get a plane ticket paid for, they can get a hotel room paid for, I think 200 and something bucks a night, if I remember right, in some of the areas of maybe around Midland, Texas, somewhere around there. Again, healthcare, food, clothing. We have citizens of our own country that I engaged in North Carolina weeks and weeks after the disaster that have some of those same needs. This is ridiculous. It really is. And I understand that all of these decisions aren't yours, but Administrator, you understand the ridiculousness of this situation, that we're not helping our own citizens, yet we're out there using our own taxpayer dollars when we have a debt right now of $35 trillion as a nation, and we're helping out citizens of other countries when we're not even meeting the fundamental needs of our own citizens. This really is an unacceptable situation. And I think if I were in your situation, yes, I understand you're asking for $100 billion, but I think that we should be looking and asking for reprogramming opportunities, because we've got to prioritize the limited resources that our nation has and focus upon our own citizens. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to maybe sum up, I heard you say in the case of North Carolina, and probably in the case of Washington State, if something similar happened, someone would be eligible for up to $85,000 of aid. Is that what I heard you say? 42.5 plus 42.5?
Yes, sir. 42,500 for fiscal year '24. That went up in fiscal year '25, but that also does not include the amount that we pay to support people in hotels, the amount that we put in to support people in manufactured housing units, or rent reimbursements. Those do not come out of their 42,500.
And on the emergency shelter support program, did FEMA create that program?
That program was directed by Congress.
Congress created that program
Congress created that
and
program.
told you to do it.
And asked me to do it, directed me to do it.
We don't ask you to do
Yeah,
things.
you don't.
We told you to do it. So it's really up to Congress to decide.
Congress directed FEMA to administer the legacy program of ESFP humanitarian assistance, and then the
All right,
establishment.
I got it.
delivery
I
of
would just,
SSB.
I think we should just issue a mirror to every member of Congress who complains to you about the emergency shelter program, so they can look at who's responsible for doing anything about it, which you're responsible for administering it, but you're not responsible for creating it.
Correct.
On the disaster relief, so it's $100 billion is the request, not $100 million.
100 billion,
Yeah, would it
40
be-
billion of which is FEMA's request.
40 billion, which is FEMA's request. And tell me why FEMA needs that supplemental funding especially for a disaster relief fund before the end of the year.
We were given the ability to spend against the fiscal year 25 budget with the continuing resolution,
Right.
which was just over $20 billion.
Right.
We went into that with a negative because we had paused close to $9 billion in payments through our immediate needs funding for fiscal year 24.
Right.
So the first bills that we paid were those recovery projects in communities across the United States. In Hurricane Helene and Milton, those costs are expensive, and the cost to respond to these two disasters is outpacing all other disasters in the previous 10 years except for Hurricane Maria. And so that is.
And I don't want to diminish the importance of Helene and Helene and Milton, but in that $9 billion, some of that money went to places that weren't in the Southeast or Appalachia because of outstanding disaster recovery requests. Is that right?
It was projects, over 3,000 recovery projects across the United States we were not able to reimburse while we were in immediate needs funding.
And so that was the 20 billion, and now you're spending the 11 billion plus that which you need otherwise because of Helene and Milton and because of the other outstanding requests that Congress hasn't funded since October 23 in the last supplemental disaster request. Is that right?
We have been very transparent with Congress about what the health of the DRF is and anticipated a shortage going into fiscal year 24 as well as fiscal year 25. We have put forth 2 supplemental requests in fiscal year 24, neither which were allowed. And so we find ourselves in a situation.
Neither of which were passed.
Were passed.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, we're allowed to pass them. We chose as a Congress not to, which is, again, we should. For some of this, we need to be looking at ourselves, but for some of these things, we need to be looking at you. For instance, on individual assistance, a universal application as for instance, we want to get Representative Titus and Representative Graves' bill passed, so there's a universal application instead of having to fill out several applications just to get, it's like trying to fund a road. We got to go for 5, 6 different grants to get a road funded in transportation rather than just get the one pot of money to do this. And for someone who's in a situation where they're trying to find a place to live because of a disaster, we need to cut down on the time and on the paperwork that they have to do to get access to this. So can you talk a little bit about the need for a universal application?
Yeah, the Disaster Survivor Fairness Act, we really appreciate, the efforts that have gone forth with this because it gives us a lot of flexibilities. It allows us to do direct repair to homes, but the other piece is about the universal application. We want to reduce the burden that these individuals are facing after they have just experienced probably the worst day in their life. And so to be able to make it easier on them is the goal of the universal application.
I want to just conclude by talking a little bit about the politics of the situation, and I condemn what this employee did as well. And playing politics with disaster aid hurts Americans. It hurts all of us, especially when they need the government most. So it's troubling that even the president-elect said he would deny disaster aid to California if the governor there doesn't listen to him. And at an event in September, the president-elect said that the governor of California is going to sign those papers. If he doesn't sign those papers related to California water policy, he won't get money to put out all the fires, and we won't give him the money to put out fires, and then he's got problems. And it's not the first time he's done something like this. And in 2019, the president-elect tweeted billions of dollars are being sent to the state of California for forest fires that with proper forest management would never happen unless they get their act together, which is unlikely. I have ordered FEMA to send no more money. The point I want to make is that it's up to this committee to responsibly hold anyone accountable who is seeking to politicize disaster aid, from a crew leader at FEMA to the president-elect or the president. None of this is acceptable, and we have a responsibility to hold everyone accountable for these comments that get in the way of getting disaster aid to people. And with that, I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the representative from Mississippi, Mr. Ezell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Administrator Criswell, for being here today. A few months ago, you agreed to consider the flood maps fully funded by the Mississippi State Legislature and implemented by the Southern Mississippi Planning and Development District. I appreciate your commitment, and as so many of my constituents are suffering due to FEMA's outdated, inaccurate flood maps. Last month, I hosted a roundtable on this issue and was pleased to hear that your staff is working in good faith with district stakeholders. I'll give credit where credit's due. However, as we've discussed today, the recent reports of one of your staffers intentionally withholding federal aid solely on political preferences beyond unacceptable and dramatically increases the political divide in our country. Unfortunately, we could keep hammering this point, but today I'm not here I want to focus on something else, some of the things going on in my district. One of my goals as a congressman is to improve the efficiency of FEMA. During my first term, I have engaged with Regional 4 regarding the dozens of projects in my district from the Gulf Coast to the Pine Belt that have drug out far too long without a resolution, or in some cases, even without a clear update. These include projects throughout Biloxi, Gulfport, Long Beach, Pass Christian, Bay St. Louis, Waveland, and Hattiesburg. Here's a timeline of events that my staff and I have discussed with your team at Region 4. Administrator Criswell, this upcoming August will be 20-year anniversary for Hurricane Katrina, 20 years. That's nearly 2 decades. The city of Biloxi is still waiting on some of their infrastructure projects. How, 20 years later, are there still unresolved projects from Katrina?
Congressman, recovery is very complicated, and every project has its own unique situation. I'm happy to look into the specific projects that you are most concerned
Thank you for
about.
that. As you can see, this is pretty hard to defend. 20 years, 20 years is a long time waiting on to get some infrastructure projects fixed, which have been funded. Another answer I hope you can clarify for me today. If an applicant identifies an error or omission in the original cost estimate, do you believe FEMA may increase funding for an improved project? Yes or no?
Congressman, I would have to understand the specifics of that to be able to answer it accurately.
If an applicant identifies an error or an omission in the original cost estimate, do you believe FEMA may increase funding for an improved project?
Again, Congressman, without understanding the specifics of that project, I don't have an accurate
Let's
answer.
move on. I'll take that as a no. According to FEMA, this project, and this is in Biloxi and Waveland, Biloxi, correction. According to FEMA, this project has not been finished because it was not accurately estimated. But I have in writing a letter from FEMA right here that the most recent CEF in 2019 accurately reflected the complexity of the project. Can you follow up with this letter, and we'll make sure that you get it, that FEMA has already confirmed and direct your staff to fund the project at the cost accurately reflected?
Congressman, I'd be happy to follow up on that specific project.
Thank you very much. I take that as a yes. The second project that I'd like to raise with you today is the Waveland, Mississippi Pier. In October, I learned that the original reason why this project was not funded was because of the scope of the work had changed. However, the city has told me the project has not changed since day one of the disaster. Now I'm hearing the original project reflected what the city says, but your agency claims it should not have. So now we're kind of back to step one. This stuff just gets so confusing. Our people just don't know which way to go sometimes. So what's it going to be? Was the mitigation work never included to begin with, or did FEMA include this work by mistake? Again, confusing. We get one answer from you sometimes, and we try to go along with it, and things just keep changing until it gets so confusing, until nobody really knows what to do. So we got to get this figured out. as we can see how this creates so much uncertainty and confusing to people who are trying to navigate through the process, because Waveland's got issues going on right now. My staff and I have worked tirelessly to try to work some of these things out with FEMA. But still, if you look at 20 years projects from Katrina that have been funded, that have not been completed, and I don't want to keep beating the drum about what one employee said or what may be the policy, but I truly hope that the lack of funding these projects isn't due to Mississippi being a red state. And with that, Mr. Chairman, with that being said, I need a commitment from you today that you will look into all these projects, that they will be handled, and that my constituents will get the help that they need back home.
Congressman, you have my commitment that we will look into all of those projects, and you have my absolute determination that we do not discriminate against any state. We provide support for everyone impacted by disasters.
And we appreciate that, but when you're looking at 20 years from Katrina, we should not be having this discussion. So thank you very much. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Washington, D.C., Representative Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Climate change has fueled an alarming rise in the number and severity of natural disasters, with once-in-a-century storms becoming a matter of course. It is critical to continue to invest in our emergency management workforce to respond to these increasing emergencies and help rebuild affected communities. Yet the Government Accounting Office found that in recent years, FEMA has been significantly understaffed. Administrator Criswell, what actions should Congress take to train, expand, and retain FEMA's emergency management workforce?
Congresswoman Norton, our workforce is the heart and soul of what we do. These are often people that I have talked to that have been disaster survivors themselves and have chosen to come work for FEMA because they wanted to be able to give back like they received assistance when they were impacted. We appreciate the passage of the CREW Act that was instrumental in allowing us the flexibilities to have a more diverse and expansive workforce through our intermittent workers of our reservists, giving them the ability to keep a full-time job, yet deploy when needed to come support people that have been impacted by disasters. I encourage you to continue to reach out to your communities and have them reach out to FEMA. We often hire local hires in communities who turn into our reservists, our core employees, or our full-time employees. And we appreciate Congress's continued support of our workforce, making sure that they have all of the tools and the resources they need to continue to do the critical work of helping people before, during, and after disasters.
Thank you. Administrator Criswell, what would be the impact on communities and disaster survivors if Congress does not pass disaster supplemental appropriation bill?
Our current balance within the Disaster Relief Fund is just under $5 billion. We went into immediate needs funding earlier this year in August when we reached a $3 billion mark. We expect without a supplemental that we will have the need to go back into immediate needs funding within the next few weeks without a supplemental. What that means is we will continue to support the life-saving, life-sustaining work, especially what's going on in Western North Carolina and all of the states impacted by Hurricanes Helene and Milton. But we have to pause the reimbursement to communities that are rebuilding. FEMA reimburses communities as they rebuild and repair their critical infrastructure. Many of these small rural communities often can't move on to the next project until they get reimbursed from the one that they are waiting for. And so this has a significant impact on a community's ability to have an effective recovery when they don't have the cash flow because they're waiting for the federal government to reimburse them for what they are eligible for under the disaster declaration.
I commend you and FEMA's thousands of staff from across the country who left their homes to deploy to communities in need and provide them with assistance in the face of destruction, trauma, and loss. And I urge the House to bring a disaster supplemental appropriations bill to the floor immediately. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair, thanks you, gentlelady. The chair now recognizes the representative from Utah, Representative Malloy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Criswell, I've been sitting here listening to some of my colleagues talk about how FEMA is battling underfunding and understaffing and misinformation. And I just want it noted that I think the willingness of the public to believe information is a symptom of distrust of federal agencies. And being here and answering questions and addressing these problems is probably the best thing we can do to battle misinformation. If FEMA employees are making political decisions that they shouldn't make and being fired for it, and we're talking about it here, I think that'll help. And then as far as funding and staffing issues, they've got to be at least partly caused by deploying FEMA to non-Stafford Act events. And as a member of the legislative branch, I have a responsibility as a member of this committee to exercise oversight of FEMA. And one of the things that we have to look into is whether FEMA's understaffed and underfunded or if they're outside of their mission. I think it's critical as a member of Congress that we hold agencies accountable to be doing the things they're authorized by Congress and only the things they're authorized to do by Congress. So with those observations, I'm going to yield the remainder of my time to Mr. Graves to continue his line of questioning from earlier.
Thank you very much, Ms. Malloy. I appreciate it. Administrator, I want to get something clear here. I mean, I understand you're saying that there's $42,500 in programs that are available. Let me say it again. There's still $10,000 and maybe even more available for citizens of illegal countries that have come here illegally from other countries that are not citizens of the United States. So I don't think that we reconcile by saying that, oh yeah, but they could potentially be eligible for this much. There still is $10,000 or more that we're potentially giving to people that broke the law, that are citizens of other countries that came to the United States illegally. I understand what Mr. Larson said, Ranking Member Larson said, but the reality is you're the administrator of this agency. You're the one who prepares the budget request that asks for these funds, and you're the one who is sitting here now saying we need $100 billion more. I think it's appropriate in this case to reprioritize funds and say this isn't an appropriate use of taxpayer funds under the fact that we're facing a $35 trillion debt. One of the other issues, the Inspector General report came out just in August, said in excess of $70 billion in unliquidated assets, unliquidated obligations dating back to Hurricane Katrina, 2005, are still out there and aren't being used. Why can't those funds be tapped and get the resources out to the people that need them right now?
Congressman, again, the Shelter and Services Program was directed by Congress for FEMA to administer. The funding for that program was given to CBP and directed by Congress to be transferred to FEMA to administer that program, and we are administering it in accordance with the law at the direction of Congress. As far as the programs and the funds that you are talking about as it relates to unobligated projects dating back to Hurricane Katrina, we consistently review all of the projects that are out there. Projects are obligated at what they expect the cost to be, and we are always reviewing to see which funds are no longer going to be needed because the estimates came in lower, and bringing those back in. We provide this in detail to Congress on a monthly basis on what those recoupments are.
Thank you, Administrator. Look, last thing I want to say is that I am very concerned about this prejudice, about the Trump signs. I've seen other policies coming out of FEMA that I believe also are prejudiced. You and I have had discussions about some of those, and I look forward to getting to the bottom of this. Yield remaining time to the chair.
Who'd you yield to? Okay.
I'll take the remainder
All right,
of my
thank
time
you.
and yield it to the chairman.
Administrator, just to follow up on my friend from Louisiana here, Look, you're an American citizen, shelter and services program, we get it, we agree. Look, not something I would vote for, but it happened, and you have the job of administrating. But you're an American citizen. You see illegal foreign nationals receiving money in the tune of billions of dollars in this administration alone, while your own citizens in your own country for, dealing with an agency for which you work, and are being criticized right now because they're not getting the money. Have you requested a reprogramming of this money? I understand it's been thrown in your lap. I get it. Not something I agreed with, but it's in your lap. But you see it. Have you requested a reprogramming of the money?
This is funding, Chairman, that we were directed to administer by Congress. We are administering it at the direction of Congress.
And you have no interest in reprogramming it?
This is funding that was directed to us to administer.
I understand, but you're a citizen too. You're working here. So do you see this as a misalignment of priorities when you're asking for more money, maybe rightly so, asking for more personnel, knowing that millions, hundreds of millions, $1 billion sent to people here illegally, while people, the citizens of this country, for which the administration and the organization that you work is supposed to be there for them, aren't receiving that money? Do you have any interest in requesting a reprogramming of that funding?
This is funding that was given to CBP and directed by Congress to transfer to FEMA to administer the shelter and service.
Yes, ma'am. I understand that, and I guess I get your answer. I would just say this in support of this organization called the Cajun Navy. People are frustrated and upset with FEMA's response, maybe rightly so, maybe not rightly so. But it seems to me that this nonprofit known as the Cajun Navy can get in the game immediately, make changes on the fly that impact people's lives. They don't have to go through a bunch of red tape and cry, we don't have people, we don't have money. They get people and equipment to the site on time and make a difference. And quite honestly, that's what FEMA should be doing. So maybe FEMA should go talk to the Cajun Navy and say, why can't we do what you're doing? What do we got to change here to do that? And with that, I yield, and I now recognize the gentleman from California, Representative Garamendi.
No, Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to take the bait. I think she identified the problem, however. It's us. If you have a problem with what the CBP is doing and transferring their responsibility to FEMA, well, why don't you write the bill? Now, let me move on to what I really want to get to here. Yes, there is a shortfall of funding. I think it's been discussed multiple times here. In that funding program, or the shortfall, there is a question about unpaid obligations. We've heard about 20 years ago with Katrina, but there are some that are much more recent. Specifically, the COVID response in 21, 22. There was a federal program authorized in the American Rescue Plan that hospitals and other agencies were directed to provide services, and FEMA programs would reimburse them. You've made good effort on reimbursing them as far as the money would go. Still about 40% of the money, specifically to hospitals in California and other states, have yet to be paid. In the supplemental that you're requesting, do you intend to use some of that supplemental money to pay for those obligations that were incurred by public agencies, hospitals specifically, so that they would be reimbursed? You're at 60%, there's another 40% to go.
Congressman, part of our supplemental request does include the anticipated cost to reimburse jurisdictions, hospitals, and other eligible entities for the costs that they incurred through COVID-19. For the hospitals specifically, we are undergoing an extensive review with a third party to make sure that we're not duplicating funding that they already received. We feel that this is an important step to ensure that we're using the taxpayer dollars to support the actual needs and not duplicating payments that they may have received from other sources or from insurance, et cetera. And so both of those will work in unison as we continue to review the submissions from hospitals. We validate that the costs have not been paid by another source. This supplemental request will include then reimbursing those jurisdictions, those hospitals, those entities for those costs.
I really like your yes, but answer. Normally, we don't like the but part, but I'm pleased to hear that the FEMA is auditing and also very carefully looking into these payments. I'm confident that you won't find a problem in California. I say that with certainty. However, nonetheless, it's important that you do the audits and that you make sure that, and it applies to other programs also, some of those that may date back 20 years or more. So thank you for doing that. I will note that the California Hospital Association believes that there's $1.3 billion that would be appropriately owed to California. However, check to be sure. Moving on, there are other issues that are also in play, some of which are really important in small communities. And I want to thank you for a change that you've made in your policies of prior funding for very small projects for across mostly small communities, some urban, some rural. I believe it's at a $1 million level. That might have enough money to get a large culvert repaired. I would ask you to take a look at that, and probably better to add a zero. And once again, the but part of your answer, really important here. So if you're going to put money out ahead of the normal process of reimbursement, good. It's necessary. The many small communities, counties, cities simply cannot front the money for 3-4 years before they get reimbursed. However, $1 million is a good step. Add a zero, and you're probably at a level that would allow those communities to get their projects underway. I want to thank you for your courage. I want to thank you for your standing tall and honest about the incredible pressure that you've received from the 2 recent hurricanes and from those that have, and other disasters that have been declared. You have an incredibly difficult job, and you are leading in a way that is exemplary. With that, I yield back. Oh, by the way, I got 11 seconds. Mr. Chairman, if we got a problem with illegals getting money, I look forward to your bill.
You might see it there, Mr. Garamendi. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana to make a request.
Mr. Chairman, asking items consent to include in the record November 18th letter from United Cajun Navy official Brian Trasher that includes observations from Todd Terrell, Sarah Galliano, and others related to Hurricane Milton. And
Without objection, so ordered. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Representative Molinaro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Administrator. I want to just take issue with, this could be my last 5 minutes on this committee, so I'm going to take all 4 and 4 minutes and 10 seconds. My colleague, Cressy Isle, with all due respect, offered what is by far the easiest and most disingenuous argument. You administer the one department in domestic policy that has to triage and set priorities, your department. And in case of a declared emergency, either as it affords itself under the Stafford Act or by some extension by the President or your own determination, you are empowered, and your department is empowered to decide what of the programs you're running today should take precedent or priority over the others. Yes, sure, we can pass a law that limits the shelter and services funding, that stops dollars to getting to illegal immigrants, but you have to make that decision every day. It's the only department in the federal government that empowers you to do so. My colleague, Mr. Graves, said somewhat earlier that you have to agree that it is absurd for Americans in the South, having now faced what is by far among the worst emergencies to befall our country, that they see those who are placed here, illegal immigrants placed here by their federal government. They see the not-for-profits you engage with handing out ease of access dollars while they have to struggle to get first to 750. I administered emergency response for 20 years at the county level. Believe me, there's a lot of improvements and coordination that FEMA must engage in. But do you see the absurdity? Because I haven't heard an answer that suggests it. Do you see the absurdity that American citizens are getting their $750 and then, yes, struggling through a very complicated process to meet the thresholds necessary to get the aid they need to have housing, food, and shelter, while your agency is contracting with not-for-profits to easily hand out access to those who are here, placed here illegally. Do you see the absurdity?
Congressman, our mission is to support people, help people before, during, and after disasters. And
Do you think that there is, ma'am, do you think in responding to an emergency, the priority of government ought to be to ensure that American citizens are triaged and that the services of FEMA are focused on responding to them and their service programs first?
I absolutely believe that the services that FEMA provides should be supporting the people that have been impacted by disasters.
Should there be equity in that distribution and response? Should there be fairness in that response?
We should make sure that all people have access to our programs and that we
Fair
remove
enough.
the
So
barriers.
this is my time, and I get 2 minutes to do it. So in fairness, do you not see the inequity in those placed here illegally, having taxpayers support a plane ticket, a house, a hotel, food, cell phones, access to health care? Do you not see the inequity that they have access immediately? I want us to be a welcoming nation, but if we cannot respond to those who are living in emergencies, then we do not have the right to claim that we are the Federal Emergency Management Administration. Do you not see the inequity?
Congress directed.
No, Congress established law. You have to prioritize, triage, and decide. During COVID, there were federal agencies and local governments who were responsible for providing lots of services. We said, in this emergency, you're not going to do that. We told federal employees, get back out onto the ground because you've got to respond to a public health pandemic, and most of them were never involved in public health response. You established the priority. Why can you not say today that the priority ought to have been to make sure that American citizens were getting first response, adequate response, and not distracted response? Why can you not say that?
Our priority is the American people, and we administered our disaster programs.
And you will not admit to or acknowledge the inequities. I'm not trying to be combative. This is absurd. Today, when you spent some time and my colleagues talk about misinformation, first, misinformation is freedom of speech, whether it's true or not. But you know what fuels misinformation? The inequity that FEMA has engaged in, because it allows for people to assume, whether true or not, a level of either incompetence, inefficiency, or lack of concern for those who are struggling the most when they see individuals enter this country illegally and then are transported here and receiving services. And you know that it is easier to access the shelter and services funding than it is to access disaster relief aid, housing assistance, small business aid. You know that it's more complicated. Doesn't that in and of itself fuel the misinformation?
Congressman, we are administering that program as directed by Congress.
You are not administering the program as directed by Congress. We established the law, we established the provisions, and we expect the person, whether it's the president or the administrator of FEMA, to decide what is and is not priority in response to emergency. And by that very measure, with all due respect, the agency has failed. And it has lost focus. My time is up. I yield back to the chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Oregon, Representative Horton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here today. A few things, we have a lot of fires, ice storms, floods that have gotten more and more severe. This year, we've had 1.9 million acres of land that was burnt with fires, and that is over twice the 10-year average. But as things are getting hotter and drier and climate is getting more extreme, some of my colleagues want to argue about why, but what I want to say is the fact of the matter is FEMA is set up for when natural disasters happen every once in a while, maybe every 6 months. And so you have a lot of temporary Stafford Act employees. Is it true that 4/5 of your employees are in that temporary Stafford Act category?
Ma'am, can you repeat the number that you said?
4/5. My understanding is 20,000 out of your 25,000 employees are in that. Is that
I
inaccurate?
believe that would be high. I believe about half of our workforce, maybe a little bit more than half, are direct employees out of the Disaster Relief Fund and support disasters directly. The rest support our steady state missions.
Okay, so half of your employees, and the fact is this has become a full-time job. I represent a lot of rural communities. I've never seen a difference between how FEMA treats my rural conservative areas and my more blue areas. And it seems like you had an employee that acted inappropriately, unethically, in an untrustworthy manner, and then lied about who, apparently, according to the facts that we know so far, lied about who was responsible for that, right?
We had a single employee that took actions that were unacceptable by directing her team to avoid homes.
Right. I just think that if you have an employee that acts in an unethical manner, it follows that maybe they're not telling the truth. But again, I've never seen any difference. And I'm going to go on to a different subject because I do represent Oregon. We had 23 fires in mid-July at the same time, earlier than we'd ever have fires, 23 incident command centers, just following a massive ice storm. We had floods. We have, you know, our rangeland, our ranchers, our farms that were burnt. Now, we have a mix of federal and state and private land, and our governor has asked for President Biden to approve a major disaster declaration for wildfire and storm damage between July 10th and September 7th. Our requests include public assistance for our 6 frontier counties, Gillum, Grant, Jefferson, Umatilla, Wasco, and Wheeler, hazard mitigation grant programs to support projects that reduce the impact of future disasters, and a state cost-sharing waiver, waiving the state's cost for emergency work in response to this disaster. This has been the most expensive fire season ever, and what it seems like is FEMA is looking at each of these fires individually, when really what we would like to see is for all of these to be taken together, because that's how we had to manage it. So when can this, and if you have to get back to me, I understand because this isn't a committee hearing on this, but when can the state reasonably expect a response to the disaster declaration request? We have our farmers and ranchers that are really, really struggling, have lost everything, and they really need this help.
Congresswoman, we did receive that request from the governor, I believe, on October 21st. And I recognize and know how important this is to you. I will certainly go back and follow up with my team to see where it's at in the process, and we'll get back with your staff.
Okay, and then the disaster declaration process often feels slow to affected communities, and we've had this again. Blue and red districts, and I do think that your agency has a giant job and doesn't necessarily always have the resources to do it. How can FEMA streamline the steps between the agency receiving a disaster declaration request and submitting a recommendation to the president?
You know, the biggest thing that we see is really at the capacity of the state and local level, and whether or not they have the resources to be able to quickly and effectively determine the amount of damage and submit that paperwork. We've been increasing our support by putting what we call FEMA integration team members and embedding staff right with state offices so they can assist with that process. We have 10 regions and a regional administrator over each of them that have great relationships with the state directors and work very closely with them to help them understand what the steps are, where they need to go, and to work through and provide technical assistance as needed.
We're over time. What I will say is these are cash-strapped rural counties that lost a lot of their economic engine when the timber industry crashed. And so they're doing the best they can, but what I would say is we really need to figure out how to get these answers quicker, and thank you for your response.
Happy to work with you on that.
Yep.
gentlelady yields. Chair now recognizes Representative Stauber.
Thank you very much, Administrator. Thanks for being here today. And also thanks for your service in the Colorado National Guard. I appreciate that. I also appreciate your willingness to tell us, and you've been in several committee hearings, to talk about how you let that employee go who weaponized the federal government. The federal government has been weaponized against the American people. This is case in point. I think you did your job, and I think you did it well. You terminated that employee who weaponized the federal government as quickly as you can. And I think we need to do more of that. With that being said, your mission statement is helping people before, during, and after disasters. When you were in the Colorado National Guard, did you have annual reviews?
Did I have a what?
Annual reviews?
I was a traditional Guard member. I wouldn't have had a.
Well, you'd still have annual reviews, okay? Outstanding, meets standards, and does not meet standards. Would that be fair enough?
As I recall.
Okay. So, if you were in the Colorado National Guard and you were in charge of disasters in Colorado, and the tag said you're responsible, and there was a major disaster that the National Guard had to be brought out in Colorado, and it took 3 days for you to deploy, and 5 days to even get into some neighborhoods, would the tag say that's acceptable for you as the leader of the management team, emergency management team?
Congressman, FEMA was on the ground before the disaster happened.
So we had 2 members of Congress that represent 778,000 people stood here or sat here just within the hour and said there were people that didn't even get responded to for 3 days and some in a week. So that contradicts what you just said, okay? I'm asking you, if you were in Colorado, what would the tag do to you if you didn't respond for 3 days to the citizens of Colorado in a disaster?
Well, Congressman.
What would he be upset with you, or would she or he be upset with you?
Congressman, our teams were on the ground before the disaster happened.
Ma'am, with all due respect, I'm not asking that question. I'm not asking that question. I asked you, would the tag be disappointed in you if it took you 3 days to help the citizens of Colorado or some neighborhood?
I think the Adjutant General of Colorado would be impressed with the way FEMA responded to this disaster.
Ma'am, I'm trying to help you here. I understand you have a tough job. I want you to be able to tell the American people that we could have done better. And as a traditional guardsman, I totally respect your service. And I expect honesty, and you should expect honesty for my questioning. I asked you, would the tag be upset with you if you didn't send your people into a disaster in Colorado for 3 days, and sometimes some neighborhoods didn't get it for 5? Would the tag be upset with you?
Well, that information is inaccurate, and I would hope he would look for accurate information.
Ma'am, how would you score yourself in this response to Helene?
I think that there is always.
Would you score yourself outstanding? Would you score yourself outstanding, meets standards, or does not meet standards?
I am incredibly proud of the work that the 22,000 members of this workforce have done to support the American people across 6 states impacted by one of the most catastrophic events in recent years.
Administrator, we had 2 members of Congress that would challenge you on that statement. The American citizens needed you at the time. They needed you, and they're still needing you, for 3 days. I mean, we had a major disaster in Minnesota. We had a governor for 3 days that watched Minneapolis burn. That's unacceptable, simply unacceptable. And I would just hope that, as we go forward, I don't want to politicize this. I mean, there's enough. But your response, you're the leader, the buck stops with you. From the testimony I heard here from the representatives of the people, it was disappointing. Do you think you could have done better?
I encourage you, Congressman, to read my written testimony, which describes in detail how we were on the ground before the disaster happened. And I respect the testimony of the 2 panel members earlier.
Do you think you could have done better?
We can always improve, and we will review all
Is that
our
a yes?
response efforts.
Is that a yes?
Nobody is perfect, Congressman. We can always improve, and we strive to always improve on the
Do you
way we
think you could have
deliver
done better,
services.
though? Yes?
We can always do better.
Okay. Listen, I want to thank you for your service. It's not easy, but when we come and ask you questions, we just expect, this is a dialogue. You represent us, the people. And if it happens in Minnesota, I would expect you to be there as quickly as I can. And I would say that, that from the statements of the two representatives, both a Democrat and Republican, you could have done much better in the response, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from South Dakota, Representative Johnson, is recognized.
So under the heading of ways that we can all improve, I want to look at the ways in that the current legislative regime, I don't think provides enough flexibility to states. I'll tell you what I mean. So now when a president declares a federal disaster, in those affected areas, governors can have the flexibility to increase the weight limits on interstates. Makes sense, makes the delivery of recovery and disaster supplies a lot more efficient. I think we've heard two things from you today, Administrator, with your colloquies with some of my colleagues. Number one, as you said to Mr. Ezell, recovery is complicated and it can take a long time. We all know that's true. And number two, disaster supplies can get pulled in from a large geographic area. So here I think are the weaknesses in the current legislative regime, and you'll tell me where my assumptions are wrong. So first off, recovery can take a long time. Right now, when the president issues this disaster declaration, I think governors are only given the flexibility to increase those weight limits for 120 days. Clearly, recovery can take a lot longer than that. Number two, disaster supplies get pulled from a large geographic area. If you're a governor in a state where the disaster supplies originate, so you're not in the area that's been impacted directly by the disaster, but you've got supplies that can help those folks a couple of states away, you don't have the flexibility to increase the weight limits on the interstates within your state. So the MOVE Act, which is a bipartisan effort in this committee, Mr. Costa and myself, would provide flexibility in both those areas by moving the amount of time that governors can have that flexibility from 120 days to 270 days. And then, again, large impacted area allows governors to waive those weight limits if they're in an area where the supplies originate. So, Madam Administrator, the MOVE Act, does that sound like that would increase the efficiency and the effectiveness of disaster response?
Congressman, I know that as I've worked many disasters across the United States, we are often reaching out to the Department of Transportation to help waive some of the limitations to move supplies across. And so I think anything that makes it easier to move resources in support of immediate response efforts would be welcomed.
Anything else you can think of in the transportation, logistics, supply chain space that would make it easier for us to get supplies to the people who need them?
Congressman, I think the biggest thing that we have and the biggest resource we have is the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, which allows governors to request resources from other states, which then, if a federal disaster declaration is declared, those costs are all reimbursed through the disaster declaration. Those types of resources and tools to be able to share resources across states are the things that actually make a big difference in the speed and the delivery of governors being able to support their communities that were impacted.
Yeah, I do think those aspects, as well as passage of the MOVE Act, would help with recovery efforts. We talked a little bit about this terrible employee, this crew leader that you had, ma'am. Obviously, you weathered a lot of questions about that. I think you've been upfront that this was a bad employee who was terminated from her job. Is there a culture problem within FEMA? I mean, is this a one-off, or are there other employees who would, as Mr. Stauber said, would be interested in weaponizing government against citizens?
The actions of this employee are unacceptable, and it is not indicative of the culture of FEMA, and I do not believe that there is a widespread cultural problem. I have directed ongoing investigations, working with the IG, working with the Office of the Special Counsel, and if we find any other acts of similar behavior, we will take appropriate disciplinary measures.
So what should Congress, what should this committee look for? I mean, we want to take you at your word. We want to believe that we don't have a culture problem within FEMA. What should we be looking for over the course of the next 3 months to validate your assertions?
I think that you should look at the results that we come out with from ongoing investigations and the amount of assistance that we continue to provide in communities and the support during their recovery process. We will be with them throughout their recovery, helping them rebuild in a way that's going to make them more resilient against future disasters.
Would an investigation from an inspector general or an ombudsman or some other third party help increase the confidence of this committee that your assertions are accurate?
We are currently in conversations with the IG, and I would welcome an inspection from the IG. And as I stated to Chairman Perry earlier, I will personally request that investigation from the IG.
Very good. Thank you. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair now recognizes Representative Webster from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question is on behalf of Lake County, one of the 4 counties I represent in Florida. It's critical for communities to know what is and what is not eligible for FEMA reimbursement. So they can plan accordingly for a natural disaster. Counties may have in place sort of a debris removal contract in advance of the disaster, so the debris removal can move quickly and follow up from the storm. However, depending on the circumstances, actual costs may exceed the contract. Unfortunately, my office has not been able to get a clear answer from FEMA on whether or not the increase is reimbursable. And I just asked the administrator, are those costs reimbursable? Or are the communities only reimbursed at the amount that they had in a pre-existing contract?
Congressman, I would need to understand the specifics of what they're asking for, and I'm happy to follow up with you and your team on that case to see what's eligible and not eligible.
I think that what they're asking is, okay, there's this contract, they have it, and they perform that, although the contract was exceeded. And so by exceeding it, do they only get what they had a contract for reimbursed, or can the excess also be reimbursed?
On the basis of what you're saying, that doesn't sound like a reasonable approach from FEMA. We would be reimbursing all eligible costs. And if they had to incur additional costs beyond their contract, that should, from what you're saying, fall under the eligible circumstances. But I would, again, have to see that specific case.
Thank you very much. Yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Representative D'Esposito.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Administrator. How are you? First, I want to start off with, I'm sure as you've heard time and time again from colleagues on this committee, it's absolutely reprehensible to withhold aid and support based on political affiliation. As you know, in addition to being on this committee, I serve as the subcommittee chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee's Emergency Management and Technology Subcommittee that is also looking into this matter. Additionally, I was the chief of the Island Park Fire Department when Hurricane Sandy brought destruction and devastation to Long Island. And I will tell you that no political affiliation, no campaign sign, nothing would have prevented me and those who served under me from helping our neighbors. So I'm sure you can understand why reports of FEMA employees skipping homes based on political affiliation and support of President-elect Donald Trump is both shocking and absolutely disturbing. First off, what has FEMA done or planning to do to ensure the homes that were passed over because of President Trump's signs are made whole?
Congressman, I appreciate your ongoing support of FEMA, and I share your concerns over the actions of this employee. We have first terminated that employee to ensure that we can continue to do the good work to support the American people. We have also sent in an additional team to go to those 20 homes that we have identified as having been skipped over to ensure that they have had an opportunity to register for assistance. And we've provided refresher training to all of our staff in the field to remind them about the importance of serving all people, meeting them where they are, and ensuring that anyone who has been impacted has an opportunity to apply for assistance.
Okay, so the employee at the center of this, who, as you said, was terminated, which I appreciate that, and I think that that was the correct course of action. But she claims that her instructions were part of a, quote, institutional FEMA policy of avoiding potentially hostile homes. So I think you briefly touched on it, but what are your plans to change or clarify this, what could be a very bogus policy, but nonetheless one that people in FEMA feel that exists, to make sure that it never happens again?
There is nowhere in any FEMA policy, any training material or information that would direct any of our staff to avoid a home because of a political sign in their yard. We do provide training to our staff about aggressive behavior and how they can make sure that they can feel safe. And as we have conducted this refresher training, we have reminded them that this is reactive behavior when somebody is approaching you, not proactive to discriminate against somebody.
Okay, thank you. And now I'm going to bring it a little closer to home. So earlier this year on Long Island, there was a 1 in 1,000 year rain event, which produced nearly 10 inches of rain, leading to widespread flash flooding that caused road closures, travel disruptions, and significant damage to public and private property. Following the rain event, the New York State applied for both public and individual assistance from FEMA. The state was successful in receiving a declaration for public assistance. However, individual assistance was just denied last week. And I know that this is an issue both my colleagues from Long Island, Mr. Lalota and Mr. Garbarino, are working on. But FEMA's public assistance program has defined the threshold of $37.5 million in damages for eligibility to New York State. However, according to the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services in New York State, determining eligibility for individual assistance is more complex and cannot be assessed as straightforwardly as the public assistance threshold. So first, is there a comparable threshold or specific dollar amount for uninsured damages that must be met for a disaster to qualify for individual assistance?
Our individual assistance program does not use a very clear-cut guideline like that because we understand that the community impact could also be a consideration. And if a community has had such significant trauma to it, we wouldn't want an arbitrary line, an arbitrary number to prevent them from getting assistance. So we have flexibility within our authorities to understand the impact of a community, but also what the availability and the capacity is of the state or the local jurisdiction to support them.
So we're going to be talking about this in the Homeland Subcommittee, but if you wouldn't mind, if you could have you and your staff, if you would be willing to provide more detailed information on how those thresholds for individual assistance are determined. I understand that it's sort of a cloudy area, but that would be able to help us on Long Island assist our neighbors and give them concrete answers as to what they're dealing with. I know that, again, Mr. Lalota and Mr. Garbarino are both dealing with a lot of phone calls, a lot of concerns, people that really don't know where to turn to next. And as we know, these storms were devastating, unexpected, which sometimes makes them even more devastating, and we just want to give them answers. So if you could provide a little bit further detailed information, we'd all appreciate it. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chairman, thanks. The gentleman, the chair now recognizes Representative Yakum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, Administrator Criswell. The hardworking men and women at FEMA have an important role to play in our communities, helping lift up their fellow Americans when they've been knocked down by a disaster. But recent months have exposed a capabilities gap and a trust gap. And that trust gap is no act of God. And I want to better understand this recent scandal in which houses in Florida were skipped by FEMA canvassers because of Trump signs in their front yard. You've referenced an investigation that is currently underway. There have been concerns expressed that FEMA is deleting emails related to the employee's assertion that it was a directive from her supervisors to skip homes displaying signs supporting President Trump. Ms. Criswell, can you commit to us today that all FEMA records, including Teams messages, emails, and text messages, have been and will be preserved for this investigation?
Congressman, all of our records are preserved, and I can commit to you that any requests that you make, we will make sure to send them to you.
Thank you. You've been fairly consistent and insistent that this was one employee who acted alone, but are you able to guarantee that no one at FEMA headquarters gave verbal or written guidance in the wake of Hurricanes Helene and Milton that recommended skipping or that otherwise warned canvases about interacting with houses with Trump signs in their lawn?
We are continuing to investigate the circumstances surrounding this, but I have been presented with no evidence at this point that there was anything beyond this one person's direction.
And what steps will you take, because it sounds like you cannot at this point guarantee that that has not taken place. What steps are you taking at FEMA headquarters to ensure and guarantee us that no guidance was given from headquarters to skip over houses that were skip over houses that have Trump signs in the front yard?
Again, we want to make sure that all people impacted by these disasters have the assistance that they're eligible for and that they deserve. We are continuing to conduct an investigation. Our Office of Professional Responsibility is currently working alongside the Office of the Inspector General, and we expect them to fully investigate the circumstances around this to ensure that this was only a single incident.
And the employee at the center of this scandal hinted that a policy to skip houses with Trump signs may have also been in place in North Carolina as well. Are you able to guarantee that there was not a similar policy in North Carolina?
Again, I have seen no evidence that shows that this was anything beyond this one person's specific instructions to her team.
The number one goal under FEMA's strategic plan for 2022 through 2026 is what? What is the number one goal under your strategic plan?
Equity as a foundation of emergency management.
And for reference, what was the number one goal under the 2018 through 2022 strategic plan?
I do not know that was before.
To build a culture of preparedness. Does skipping houses with Trump signs advance equity, which is your number one strategic plan goal?
Equity, as we look at it, is to make sure that we are reducing barriers for anybody that has a need to access our programs. And so we are ensuring that we are taking down barriers so all people impacted by disasters have access to the programs that they need and that they are eligible for.
And equity, according to FEMA's own guidance, which, in the executive order signed by President Biden, executive order number 13985 defines equity as, quote, the consistent and systematic, fair, just, and impartial treatment of all individuals. Do you believe that the individuals with Trump signs in their front yard were treated fairly and impartially?
They were not, which is why we terminated her.
Thank you. And I'd like to yield the balance of my time to the chairman, Mr. Perry.
Oh, well, the chair thanks the gentleman. Administrator, you're in support of the supplemental request. You're in support of that, right? And you would kind of agree with the assertion that you don't have the staffing necessary to complete your mission in one form or another.
That I don't have the staffing?
You don't have personnel.
I have the staffing and personnel to complete our mission.
You do.
I need funding to continue to support reimbursing.
You need the funding. Okay. So let me ask you this. You figure out your strategic plan, and it seems to me that your strategic plan bumped your core mission of helping people before, during, and after disasters. Can you explain? I mean, you sent, I think, is it 2 people to Azerbaijan? I don't know how far Azerbaijan is, but your organization sent, as I understand, is it more than 2 people or just 2 people to the, as it's stated, the Solidarity for a Green World Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP probably 24 or 25 or whatever the heck it is. 2 people? How many?
COP 29, I believe we sent 2 people.
2 people. What? Who approves that?
I do.
You approve that. So can you provide the committee the details on how much that cost, how much their stay was, and how that, look, people here talk about disinformation. One of the biggest portions of disinformation that I consistently see is that disasters are more frequent. They're more devastating. Simply, the data doesn't support any of that, and it's all, and allegedly that's all caused by us. And no data supports that either, yet that's made. Those assertions are made, and one of those assertions is, of course, about climate change itself, and of course you're sending your staff, which apparently you have enough of, but you don't have enough money, but you're paying, so we'd like to know how much all that cost to send them to Azerbaijan. With that, the chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Representative Van Drew.
Chairman, thank you. Administrator, you seem like a really nice person, and you have a very nice personality, and you seem calm and gentle. So I'm going to apologize in advance because I'm angry, and I'm tired of it. I don't only sit on transportation. I sit on judiciary And, you know, I've been at hearings for hours where we were told that there wasn't any plan to go into Roman Catholic churches. And I'm digressing, I realize that. And yet we found out there was, and they had to apologize. We were told that nobody was going to school board meetings because people were reflecting their individual opinions. And again, over time, we dug in and found out there was. There is a culture in America that this issue represents and symbolizes. Now, I'm a plain speaker, I'm a plain talker, and I'm very direct. So I'm going to ask you some things. I know you've talked about it, but the reason we keep going back to it, Administrator, it's a really big deal. It's the First Amendment that people have the right to express their viewpoint, their feelings, who they want to vote for, what they believe, whether they're liberal or conservative, Republican or Democrat, Trump or Harris, who cares? Because guess what? The folks on the other side of the aisle should know if it happened to us, it could happen to them. That's the reality. And I believe that FEMA's blatantly neglected its core mission of providing emergency support to all Americans without prejudice or bias. And I also believe this doesn't happen in a vacuum. And I understand the person who's been fired, she swears that this came from above her. So the first question I'm going to ask you, that this was part of the administration. Is she a liar?
Her allegations, I have not seen any evidence that this is beyond her specific direction, but we are conducting additional investigations to ensure that this is an isolated incident.
So the truth
and that
is
we will take disciplinary action if there was more than her direction.
The truth is we don't know yet. It's the culture. It's the culture of what's going on. And you know, part of what they said, this individual, they called Trump supporters, and I know your answer is going to be, no to this, as, quote, vicious dogs, end quote. I want to just say how deep and mean this was. Do you believe that Trump supporters are vicious dogs?
That was a comment that was not made by me, and I do not believe in that comment, no.
Okay, I'm sure you don't. Do political affiliations with the Republican Party make someone inherently dangerous because they happen to be a Republican? Yes or no?
That is not in alignment with our core mission and our values of integrity, compassion, fairness, and respect.
And I agree, and I understand that, but think about this. People, when they are their most vulnerable, most in need, most scared, most worried, in the most trouble, probably in their entire lives, hardworking men and women of America, looking to a federal agency to protect them, to help them, to take care of them, and they got literally a knife in the heart. I mean, that's what this really represented. Those people, how do they feel? They break their back paying the taxes that keep us all going here. So when we finally are supposed to do a job, this is what happens. How heartbreaking is that?
Congressman, this was unacceptable, and it is heartbreaking.
I know.
I have pushed for 3.5 years to put people first.
And you know what?
Everything that we do.
And that's what kind of, and again, forgive me, I'm going to editorialize for a minute. We speak of equity, which is different than equality, and it's become a political symbol to some degree, whether folks want to admit it or not. We're worried about pronouns. We're worried about illegals. We're worried about everything, and I get it. But how about just worrying about the average man and woman who's working, who lives in America, who's legal, who pays their taxes, who obeys the laws, and finally needs help? Because most of these people never need help. They don't want anything. They get their Social Security when they retire, and that's about it. Just think how they feel. And I'm concerned, and I have to tell you, I have personally asked Joe Kufari, who is the Inspector General in Homeland Security, personally asked him, sent him a letter. He's a good man. He's an honest broker to look into this and really dissect this and see what's going on. I think we're going to find it's more than one person. That culture allowed this one person to think it was okay. That culture that we've had, whether it's in the Department of Justice, or whether it is here in Homeland Security, other areas, that culture has allowed this to take place. That culture is wrong, and it denies the most fundamental values of Americanism. You know, somebody said to me humorously, hey, and this wasn't humorous, President Trump had a really good result in the state of New Jersey. He didn't quite make it, but it's usually a very, very blue state. The state I'm from is New Jersey, because we're having wildfires right now, as you probably know. And people wonder, are we going to be punished because it was so supportive of President Trump? I would hope not. Because to be honest with you, I do my job. I was a dentist in my other life, and your job is kind of like that. We have to take care of people, not in the political end, but in the governmental end, regardless of who they are, what they believe, what they feel, what they've said. That is our responsibility and job. This is so unbelievably, fundamentally wrong. And I'm not showboating here as a politician. I swear to God, this really bothers me. It really bothers Americans. It's a grievous mistake. It's awful that it happened, and it has to be fixed. I wanted to see if there's any other questions. Hold on for a second.
The gentleman's time.
Oh, my time is up. Boy, there is no more questions, right, Chairman? Chairman, thank you for making me aware of that. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. He might seek time from the next representative if he has any left. The next representative, Representative Bean from Florida, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Very good morning to you. Good morning, T&I Committee, and good morning, Administrator. Welcome. Let's cut through the disinformation that's been talked about. So let's play a game called True or False. I'll say a statement, you say true or false, Madam Administrator. After Helene, it was widely reported that a FEMA supervisor told aid workers to avoid homes advertising Trump. Is that true or false?
A single employee directed her team to not go to homes.
I'm going to put you down for a true then. Is that correct?
A single employee.
I'm putting you down for a true. FEMA, here's the next one. FEMA is supposed to be nonpartisan. FEMA is supposed to be like the police or fire department. When they come, they're going to deliver aid. They don't care about your race, political affiliations or anything. They're supposed to just get the job done. Is that true or false, Madam Administrator?
True. FEMA is a nonpartisan agency.
Another true. Putting you down for a true. According to a committee and an email to committee staff, that person responsible was fired from FEMA. Is that true or false, Madam Administrator?
That individual was terminated at my direction.
I'm going to put you down as a true. How do you know, though, it's only one person? How do we know?
This is why I have ongoing investigations, and we will be working with the IG to establish that it was just a single incident.
You're working with the AG. That is fantastic. The Daily Wire has obtained screenshots of multiple entries in the system that said Trump signed no contract per leadership. So that's could be evidence, at least it's a trail to begin your investigation. Would you say that's true? That's a good lead. Is that a good lead?
Those were the staff that the individual in question directed not to go to Trump homes.
I'm going to put you down for another true. So here is the question. Do you understand why Americans lack confidence in FEMA leadership? You understand that.
Trust is the most important thing that we can have in government.
Again,
and
you
to
would
have
say
one
yes.
individual.
Can I put you down as a yes that you do understand why so many people are upset?
It is unacceptable why this one person made this direction, and I can understand why they are upset.
Yes is so much easier to say. Yes, I understand it. You understand why people are mad. I'm not trying. It's not a. I got your question. I'm just saying
yes,
you understand.
I understand why the actions of this one individual can be so hurtful.
Very good. And I'm going to congratulate you on saying we might need some help from the Inspector General, because Americans just need trust in their fire department, their police department, and in FEMA. So what is the plan to restore Americans' trust in FEMA? What's the plan?
We are going to continue with our absolutely committed 22,000 plus employees to assist in the recovery efforts across these disasters and the over 100 other open disasters across the United States, helping them rebuild and restore their lives to get back to some sense of normalcy.
Thank you, Administrator. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Are there further questions from any members of the subcommittee who have not yet been recognized? Seeing none, that concludes our hearing for today. I'd like to, and I'm going to thank each of the witnesses. Administrator, it's been tough, but we do appreciate you being here. I know it's not always fun or pleasant, but we're very appreciative that you took the time to come and hear our questions and provide your answers. So with that, this subcommittee stands adjourned.
Hey y'all, it's Silk from the Diamond and Silk Chit Chat live show. Look, don't forget to check me out right here on RSBN Network. Be sure to watch the show on Right Side Broadcasting Network, and I want you to support Right Side Broadcasting Network. Yes, it's imperative that you do so, okay? I look to see y'all soon. Bye-bye.
A large retail store just canceled a huge order, leaving us with a ton of extra MyPillows. But you know what? That's their loss. I'm going to make it your gain. For the first time ever, you get standard classic MyPillows for wholesale prices, only $14.88. I can't believe I'm even saying that. Only $14.88. But it gets even better. For a limited time, I'm going to offer my entire classic collection at wholesale prices. Upgrade to a queen-size MyPillow for just $18.88. King size only $1 more. Get my body pillows for $29.88 and multi-use MyPillows for only $9.88. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on the screen. Use your promo code to take advantage of wholesale pricing for the first time ever on TV, including my standard size MyPillow, only $14.88. They've never been offered this low before. We have limited quantities at this price, so limit's going to be 10, and once they're gone, they're gone.
Welcome to Right Side Broadcasting Network, your trusted conservative news outlet. At RSBN, we deliver the truth when the mainstream media falls short. Since 2015, we've proudly broadcasted every single one of President Trump's iconic MAGA rallies, bringing you the excitement and energy live before anyone else. By watching RSBN, you get an unfiltered front row view of the action on the ground. We interview the crowds to give a voice to millions of Americans just like you. We show you President Trump's speeches in their entirety, free from interruptions and censorship. We cover the stories that matter to you with the integrity and passion you deserve. Thank you for choosing RSBN as your home for America First news. Together, we stand strong, united, and informed. So join us and be part of the right side of history.